But yeah, that twinkle in his eye in the tunnel before he came out, I was in the tunnel that day at Murrayfield, and it was special, and he knew it was a special moment. He was so determined to be there, and it was incredible. And it's difficult to put into words, but he had something magic about him. He used to say when we met as the board of trustees would meet, he used to say, look around the table, and he would look at Scott and JJ and me, and he'd say, you never thought I'd still be here. You thought you were buying into something that was going to be over, but we're still here. We're still here, and we wish he still was. We thought he was invincible. We just thought he would carry on forever, and that's the heartbreaking thing. He's not carrying on forever, but he, by goodness me, if ever a man lived his life well, it was Doddie.
When it didn't strike me straight away, it struck me later. Here was a man 6'7", or a boy 6'7", thin as a gazelle, and athletic. And I worked it out that what we could do with him was what other teams had done to us. He could win line-up ball, he could prevent the opposition winning line-up ball, and he could run and pass and so on. So it was a blessing that when Doddie came down from Corto Ferry in his car towards Gala,
I know what's coming.
he took a left fork towards Melrose, a bit, the eureka moment for him when he came through Langley.
Welcome to the official Scottish Rugby podcast with Caroline Blair and Chris Paterson. In light of the news at the weekend of the passing of Doddie Weir, this episode will be dedicated to celebrating the life of this incredible, incredible man. To do so, we're joined by two of his close friends, by Jill Douglas, the Chief Executive of the My Name's Doddie Foundation, and of course Jim Telfer, the man who coached Doddie at club, country and onto British and Irish Lions level. So thank you both so much for joining us today. Jill, the global outpouring of love, of appreciation, of admiration, of shared grief that we've seen for Doddie, that must, I'm sure, come as a comfort to Cathy, to the family, and to those like yourselves who knew him so well.
Absolutely, and it's not really surprising because we've seen that outpouring of love and respect for Doddie, not only through his life as a rugby player, but certainly in the last 5 years since he shared his diagnosis and was so candid about the effects of motor neuron disease. People have responded in an incredible way to support him, to support the foundation, but also in the last few days just to show their support for Cathy and the family. It's been incredible, and yes, indeed, it is some comfort to them. Of course, we're all heartbroken because he leaves a huge hole in our lives, and he was such an incredible character, larger than life, and somebody that we were all, incredibly fond of, and so it's difficult to imagine life without Doddie. That said, he leaves an incredible legacy, but yeah, he's enormously missed, not just by the huge public outpouring of grief, but certainly very personally by Cathy, Doddie, and of course their close friends and family.
And our deepest condolences go to Cathy, to Hamish, Angus and Ben too, to all of Doddie's family and close friends. And I think the thing with Doddie Weir is that you never forget that moment. If you were privileged enough to have met him, you will never forget that moment when you did first meet him. Jim, take us back to that time for you when you first met Doddie.
Well, actually, it's a long time ago, and I can't even remember it. But I see clips on TV and hear people speaking. And he came to us at Melrose when he was about 18, and about the same time I had joined the club to help coaching. I was headmaster at Hoyk at the time, and I wasn't supposed to be doing any coaching. That was the deal I'd made with the region. So I thought club coaching wasn't too bad as time off for international coaching. So I 1989 or 88, something like that, and Chris may not believe this, but Melrose and Scotland have always had the same problem, or what did when I was playing and then coaching. We never could get big enough forwards to compete with the opposition. I think this is still true with Scotland, but we have produced some huge fellows like Doddie, and so we always struggled against teams like Gala and Hoyk at the club level, and England, of course, and South Africa, and these teams, the All Blacks and so on, at the international level. So when it didn't strike me straight away, it struck me later. Here was a man 6'7", or a boy 6'7", thin as a gazelle, and athletic. And I worked it out that what we could do with him was what other teams had done to us. You know, he could win line-up ball, he could prevent the opposition winning line-up ball, and he could run and pass and so on. So it was a blessing that when Doddie came down from Corto Ferry in his car towards Gala,
I know what's coming.
he took a left fork towards Melrose, a bit, you know, like, you know, the eureka moment for him when he came through Langley, you know, to Melrose, and so that's where the story begins, and that's it goes on from there. But to be quite honest, I was not involved with Doddie all the time, because I wasn't involved with Scotland when he was involved with Scotland until maybe, well, the end of the World Cup, 91, I stopped then, and then in 97 with the Lions, and then later when I got involved again. So, but at Melrose I was involved quite a lot, and with him from about 88 on to 94 or something like that.
I must say, there's a great story about you as well. When you met Doddie early on as a young cub player, and he was signing the back of the jerseys, he was putting names. What was that story? Tell us that one.
I forgot about that. That was well, it's a nod to how good a tourist Doddie was, and then it was 1999, my first international tour. We toured South Africa. It was a non-cap tour, and we went to South Africa, and I was just stepping out. I was playing for under-21s at the time, and stepping as an amateur player, still playing for Gala. And it was a nod to the old days where the first thing you got when you went on tour was your kit issue, but there was a standard kit issue, but there was also a Doddie kit issue, and Doddie had these t-shirts made up with a nickname on the back. And mine was Twiggy. Like, absolute Twiggy, aye. It was just because I was stick then. I thought it was a bit ironic Dodgy giving me that one, but he had a nickname that he made up for everybody, and there were certain times on tour you had to wear your t-shirt. And I genuinely think he deliberately made it about a 3XL as well, just to accentuate the Twiggy. So, but he was just an incredible person. It's really hard, isn't it, to find the right thing to say, and I think a lot of people have thought this over the last few days, and whether it's the right thing to say or the right thing to write, because there's a pressure, because he's such a wonderful person. I remember when he must have taken that left fork in the road to go to Melrose, because his dad Jock played for Gala, and his younger brother Tom played for Gala. I played with Tom for a long time for Gala, and actually one of the things I was thinking about for the last few days was kind of my first knowledge of Doddie, and obviously knew him as a player, but I remember Melrose playing Gala, and I've actually looked back, it's October 95, and Tom was coming through as a number 8 who's in Scottish schools and Scottish under-21s and a quality player. Doddie was already an established international by now, and one of the build-ups to the Melrose Gala game was Weir versus Weir, and Tom Weir's coming after his big brother and he's going to show him up, and filled my heart with pride because he was playing for Gala at the time. And I remember going to Greenhouse to watch a game, and Doddie just battered Tom. He just clipped the first card 2 or 3 times, clipped him across the ear. Melrose eventually won pretty well, but it was like, for all the fun and hilarity you had with Doddie, he was hard, he was tough. I remember clips on Border TV of this guy you looked up to, and you thought, oh, he's such a fun person, fighting a Melrose versus Jed game, scrapping, fighting in sevens. Like, for all he was happy and cheery, he was a tough competitor as well. And I don't know, it's just another string to his bow. So it's a wonderful person. And
we'll keep bringing the rugby element in, of course, as well. Jill, you knew him in so many capacities, and of course your husband Carl, very close friends too. Talk about your relationship with Doddie and the man that you knew.
I've known Doddie, well, I go back to our teens, a bit like Jim, back in the memory bank to sort of remember those first meetings, but he was on ponies and horses around young farmers and pony club, and just the sort of Scottish borders rural community, the farming community. That's how I first met Doddie. And Kathy I knew as well through sort of point to points, so long before she ever met Doddie. So we've kind of all grown up together. And I don't know whether I would thank Doddie for this, but he introduced me to my husband, Carl. I should really thank him for that. And we, just great friends. And I look back at the many happy memories we all shared together with the kids. Times at Cortle Ferry with Jock and Nanny, times at Blue Cairn with Kathy and the boys, down in Cheltenham where he would come down he loved to come down to the races, but also just many happy times at Melrose Rugby Club. We were our formative years there and made the most brilliant friendships, and that's what rugby gives you so often. And Doddie, of course, was always at the centre of the fun and the nonsense, and he was mischievous, as we all know, and he liked to play the odd practical joke, and he certainly did that with us. But there was always a party if Doddie was around, and he just makes you smile. You can't hardly say his name without smiling. And he was universally loved because you talk about when you first meet him, or those who have met him over the years, the number of people who get in touch who say, oh, he came to our rugby club, he spoke at our rugby club, I bumped into him in a filling station. They felt like they knew him. They felt like they were friends with him. And that's the way he was. And he never had a degree of self-pity the whole time after his diagnosis. Never once heard him think, why has this happened to me? He just thought, well, it has happened to me, so I've now got a responsibility to do something about it. But yeah, I just, sharing a glass or two, enjoying each other's company, and getting the most random WhatsApp and text messages at all hours of the day and night. And he and Carl had this great thing where wherever they were in the world, they would just phone each other, and it could be the middle of the night, but they had to pick up, and they would just have great banter. So yeah, many, many happy memories when I think about Big Dodd.
It's funny because just Jill's talking about the number of rugby clubs or places he'd been, and it's easy to see the big venues, the big stadiums. The first time I ever played against Doddie, this might make you angry, Jim, I think you were maybe coaching at this time, wasn't on the European circuit, wasn't the Celtic League as it was then, wasn't an international, it was a wee village outside Gala called Clovenfords, and they have a civic week. Jill's giggling as well. They have a civic week, and it must have been about, I don't know, 90, it might have been 97 or 98. Now obviously Doddie's international, and he played in the civic week sevens, just about 30 of us, and it was like the first time I played against a full international player at Clovenford sevens. There wasn't even any fans there. It was basically a carry out at the side of the pitch, and Doddie played with his brothers, and we had a team of just friends just playing. And I thought, like, where on earth would you get that now? Like someone at the top of his game, full international, playing in a kind of civic week on the pitch at Caddenfoot. I'm going even further away from Clovenford, a tiny wee football pitch at Caddenfoot, and it just sums him up. Just a brilliant man with a massive love for rugby.
That love for rugby as well, he credits you with to the hugest degree, Jim. In fact, in his book, My Name's Doddie, he said, without Jim Telfer, I wouldn't be sitting here and writing a book about my life in rugby because I wouldn't have had one.
It's given me far too much praise, to be quite honest. I think the great thing about Doddie's career was that he had the ability, and he was. He went with the Scottish schools to New Zealand with Rob Moffat as the coach. It's from Stuart's Melville, but then he became a senior player, and but it was the environment we had at Melrose that allowed him to develop. And people ask me, what makes good coaches is good players. You can make players better, but you can't make a kick live at a pig's ear. And Doddie and a lot of the rest of them, Carroll, for example, Craig Chalmers, Graham Shield, Steve Brotherson. I better not forget some of them, but the Redpaths and so on. Brian was a wee bit later, but it was I think the team ethos and the work that they did. I mean, I was quite a hard taskmaster. I must admit, we used to train on Sundays. It's brilliant.
I think you might be underplaying that there, Jim.
I think it's scientifically, it's the best day to do it, But I don't suppose some of the fitness guys will believe that. We used to train on Sundays, So did Scotland, by the way, in the amateur professional days. But we used to train Sundays because, I think Craig's mentioned it, that was because the players had come from all over. Well, in Scotland they're not all over, but they were on the Saturday. Why not just stay for an extra day and train? So Doddie had this innate ability, like a borderer. He knew rugby, he could play rugby, he was brought up in a rugby atmosphere, Stuart's Melville, a rugby family, but he developed as an international through the club environment, I think, and then he took it on from there. And it was just, there's a wee story about to get him to come to Melrose, because there was talk that he would go to Gala, because Jock, his dad, had played poor, so, and so around that time, 1988, 9, there's a lot of injuries with backs and shoulders. And Carl had a bad injury. Carl, my nephew, had a bad injury, and Jock heard about this, and he didn't want Doddie to play in the second row as a schoolboy. So I convinced Jock that I would play him number 8, knowing full well that probably in 3 or 4 years' time he would not be a number 8, just to get him to be there.
It got him in.
He got him in.
I know, he didn't play him there often, but he was skillful enough to do both. Like, he really was. And I think what you're hinting at or touching on there, Jim's leadership. Now, through your leadership at the club that creates that environment, and so much in the modern days spoken about leadership and leadership courses and how to develop leaders, and it was just built into Doddie. What you're describing is maybe not in the obvious sense of leadership, but he's driving a culture within a club, and the same Joe with the foundation. His leadership, for someone who maybe wouldn't be seen as a leader, he'll be seen as somebody who's fun.
People.
Yeah, that leadership is incredible, Joe.
He did, but I'm still thinking about Jim and his Sunday morning training sessions, because the boys absolutely hated it. And of course, the Saturday night was always slightly curtailed, because they knew that they were going to have to turn up at the Greenyards on a Sunday and get beasted by Jim. And the panic, I can remember the panic sort of oversleeping or not being in the right part of the country to get to the Greenyards. And my car wouldn't start one day, and Carl was just about, he and Stephen Brotherson started walking to Melrose, because they were so worried about not getting there. And they thought if they didn't get there, if they didn't train, they wouldn't play. And of course, all they wanted to do was play. And so I can remember that vividly, these mornings of them all phoning round long before mobile phones, ringing saying, how are we going to get to training? So, and
they were never late.
and Doddie, of course, he was never a committed trainer, let's be honest. It was never something that he looked forward to, but he did what he had to do to keep himself. He was naturally very fit. He was naturally gifted, of course, as we know. But as far as being a leader, he was never normally a captain, although he did captain Newcastle Falcons and to great success. But what he had was an ability to get the real best out of people around him. And so certainly from his family, I look at, the way he was with his brothers and his sister and the rest of the extended family. They all looked to Doddie for leadership and for a direction and support, and that was very strong, amongst his friendship group as well. But also when you talk about the foundation, he let us get on with what we were doing, but he had an eye on everything, and he questioned everything and he challenged everything. But every day you were inspired to do as best as you could by him, and even now, everything that we do, every decision I make, I think, what would he think of this decision? What would he be thinking if I was sharing this with him now? And that's the way that I'll go on, because he had a very clear vision of what he wanted, and he certainly wanted us to carry on the work that he started. But yeah, he could be quite a hard taskmaster, and there was nothing got past him. And you get the most random messages. He said to me, I see we've launched a coffee. I said, yeah. He says, well, I need a coffee grinder. How about we do coffee grinders? I think he was more excited about the red wine than anything, mind you.
What, in terms of his involvement with the foundation, Jill, you've given us an indication there about how involved he was, but in terms of the journey and the creative process and thinking about the things, and he was clearly very open to the ideas that were put forward to him, and seeing how actively involved he was, especially at the opening, at the onset of the foundation, in getting involved, the active side of it, how important was that to him to make it about being active too?
Yeah, definitely. And his energy was unbelievable. You know, his ability to turn up and do things and see people, and some of it was very visible. And so, you know, he certainly drove the foundation by his huge character and his commitment and his open, candid way that he spoke about the disease and how it affected him and his family. And many people were touched by that, and it gave huge comfort to people who were given that initial diagnosis. And similarly, we created a booklet we shared with, and we continue to share with patients, about how he was handling the disease on a day-to-day basis. And I think that openness and the eloquent way he spoke of the disease was really, really helpful to many, many people, and will continue to be helpful to many people. But what people didn't see was what he did quietly behind the scenes, and whether it was talking to our team that run the foundation and encouraging them and giving them the support that they needed. But equally, he spent hours and days talking to people privately, patients, people living with MND, family members, people with other things happening in their lives where they looked to him as a beacon of hope. He put so much of himself into it. And sometimes I felt too much, and I would sometimes try and pull him back, or sometimes say, maybe this isn't for you. But he was so committed, and he every day he said, "I'm lucky, Jill. I'm lucky because look around me. I've got my family, I've got my friends. I'm set here at Blue Cairn. I'm the lucky one. It's my responsibility to be the voice and to help those that aren't as fortunate as me." I mean, if that's not testament to the man, what is?
Jim, you spent a lot of time at Blue Cairn, and you'll have seen exactly what Jill's saying and how she's referring to how Doddie was and how he approached his MND diagnosis. What are your thoughts on that?
I actually have great admiration more since he was diagnosed, or was diagnosed with MND, than before, because I mean, he, as Jill says, everything was a challenge, but he never felt that he was being punished for anything, and he was so positive. Every time he went up, he had the usual smile on his face, and he was, you know, wanting to do things. I mean, he went all over the place to dinners and so on. We once went down to Gatehouse of Fleet, which is in a different time zone to us, you know, down near Kirkcudbright. And Doddie he drove at that time, and we were supposed to stay the night. And seemingly the Weir family had gone to Gatehouse of Fleet for their holidays, and he was honouring a sort of friend down there by going to a do, and he drove all the way down. I mean, and he could drive quickly, and you just sort of sat. Well, I sat in the front, and Gary was in the back, you know, and you just shut your eyes, and they sort of seemed to know the road. We went down there, did the function. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. He says, "Oh, we're just going home. We'll just go home." So he arrived back in Gala, Blue Cairn a bit later, but Gala about 2 or 3 hours later. So it was, I admired him more going to these functions and listening to his story and putting across so eloquently what it was about and what you know, what he was going through and what would happen. And I've seen it since he died. I mean, for him to say, you know, you lose your limbs, you lose this, you lose that. And I think it was with chap Burrows at the time, he was saying that. And it just grew and grew and grew as a person to me. And I mean, people will say, "Well, what's your memory of him?" My memory of him is sitting in his chair up at Blue Cairn with a lovely smile on his face. And when you go in, or when I went in, the dog used to bite my knees, and I said to Doddie, "What? what are you doing with this thing? I like dogs and dogs. I've had dogs most of my life. And he just laughed and so on, you know. And
he probably trained it to do that to you, Jim. He trained it.
It was a lab. Labs don't bite people. So his eyes lit up, and he was delighted to see you. And latterly his speech wasn't too clever, but up until 6 weeks ago he could speak. I could understand what he was saying. And I like going up to see him because there's always a boy there. They didn't seem to work, you know. And they were always. I went up about 11 because he went in the chiropractic in the morning, Monday morning, and I would go about 11, get a cup of coffee with this coffee machine and biscuit and things like that. And one of the sons would be having his meal and the rabbit food, you know, and we'd have a conversation, 5-way conversation, a 4-way conversation. There were always the boys were around when I went up, and Doddie used to ask me, tell them what they should be doing, and of course he loved me to tell them they're lazy, whatever, you know, and he says, I've told him that, and he loved me to tell them what they had to do. To make it as if I would know, you know.
Nah, they would listen.
They
Jim.
would listen.
They
though.
would listen. But that sums up. As you're describing that, I can visualise it. I mean, sometimes I've been up to see young and the fan was pigs in the house. The Chuck and Nanny's farm at the pet pig, and Doddie would shout at the pig, and somebody else would be shouting at Doddie, and it was just this warm family kind of environment that, like, I think he's been able to tap in to everybody around the globe, really, because of that. And you mentioned Smile, and go back 3 weeks to the New Zealand game here, where presenting the match. Well, and one of the things, I was on the radio that day, and I was like, I just utterly in awe of the moment. But the fact that he smiled was amazing. Like, utterly, that's kind of my last memory. It's like what is dealt with, and how hard done by he's been. He would never say that. He's still smiling in that moment because he's so proud of who he is, what he's representing, and just what he's achieving. I've been in awe, similar to you, Jim, since he's diagnosed. I've been in awe of. I didn't know it was possible for a human to care so much for other people and not himself, like in his actions and his words, and that'll continue.
I think that really highlights the point as well that, as I say, anybody who was blessed enough to have known Doddie and to have spent any time with him, it comes as absolutely no surprise to us that there was this global outpouring of desire to support him in his drive to tackle this horrendous disease of motor neuron disease. And Jill, the thing that always struck me with Doddie is the fact that he was surprised by the fact that there was so much love and outpouring for him too, and there was a real grounded approach to this, but you couldn't not want to help this incredible man.
That's true, but I tell you what, he could never get carried away with himself, not if you lived at Blue Cairn and had the boy really happy, and friends like Gary and Doddie, Gary and Carl, and of course that was never his nature anyway. But yeah, that twinkle in his eye in the tunnel before he came out, I was in the tunnel that day at Murrayfield, and it was special, and he knew it was a special moment. He was so determined to be there, and it was incredible. And it's difficult to put into words, but he had something magic about him. He used to say when we met, as the board of trustees would meet, he used to say, look around the table, he would look at Scott and JJ and me, and he'd say, you never thought I'd still be here. You thought you were buying into something that was going to be over, but we're still here. We're still here, and we wish he still was. We thought he was invincible. We just thought he would carry on forever, and that's the heartbreaking thing. He's not carrying on forever, but he, by goodness me, if ever a man lived his life well, it was Doddie. Thank you so much, Jill, and to Jim for joining Chris and I today on the official Scottish Rugby podcast and sharing your memories of Doddie. Our deepest condolences, of course, do go to Cathy, to Hamish, Angus and Ben, to Doddie's family and his close friends. But with his passing, Doddie has now passed the ball on to rugby fans, as we've said, the world over, to continue raising money and awareness of motor neuron disease through the incredible work of the My Name's Doddie Foundation. So to donate or to find out more, you can log on to myname5doddie.co.uk.